always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, April 1st, 2025. My name is Sam Seder. This is the five-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Rachel Cohen, lawyer formerly of Skadden, Arps, Slate, Meagher, and Flom, recently quit over that law firm's capitulation to Donald Trump. Also on the program today, it's Election Day. Wisconsin Supreme Court race, record-breaking spending. Meanwhile, two races in Florida, there's surprises that even one of them could be contentious. We will be talking about that later. Trump, meanwhile, launches the next wave of attacks on our functioning government. Massive layoffs in health agencies and more. And tomorrow is Tariffs Day or Liberation Day?
It's the new Emancipation Proclamation.
Oh, jeez. As it becomes clear that Trump is seeking a huge transfer of wealth upward. Senate Republicans attempting budgetary sleight of hand may just ignore the parliamentarian.
You can do that?
I wanted a thunderclap, but I had the wrong board up. Trump sued over his executive order imposing unconstitutional restrictions on voting. And Trump thugs send more people to El Salvador in prison after admitting they sent a Maryland father with legal status to rot in essentially what is a dungeon. Proud Boys and right-wing militias now mobilizing to pro-Musk protests. In Gaza, Israel kills 15 Palestinian paramedics one by one, and then buried them in a mass grave. Trump task force threatens Harvard. And a federal judge delays Trump's temporary protected status rescission for Venezuelans. Cory Booker holds the floor for 18 hours while Chuck Schumer naps.
We will rest.
That's a good point. And advance bookings for Canada-U.S. flights through the summer are down 70% year over year. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It is
Newsday Tuesday.
We've got so much to get through. I should say, I realized when I got into the office that today was April 1st, April Fool's Day. I hadn't thought about it, and so we don't have a April Fool's Day show again.
Legalized comedy.
But if you want, go back and we still have some of the Ken and Ken stuff.
You got to
put more of it up.
Yeah.
If you go on YouTube to Ken and Ken show, you can see some of our. I think some of them were April Fools, or some of them were Halloween. I don't know. So go check that out. Sorry, don't have more than that for you. We're going to get later in the program to talk about the massive cuts. 10,000 people at various agencies in health agencies, ranging from primarily the FDA, which does food and drug safety. Presumably, it's going to be, I mean, this is the most libertarian philosophy and I've heard it for years and years, and it's just absolutely absurd. And frankly, also, well, I've heard it from like hardcore libertarians, people who say, I'm a libertarian, so like literally where they had to, Tim Carney, when I used to be on MSNBC with him, Dylan Radigan's show, everything was prefaced, I'm a libertarian, so. The idea that agencies can be corrupted, that they can be bought out by corporate influence is very, very real. The idea that the solution to diminishing corporate power over our government is to shrink government is one of the dumbest ideas introduced in modern times, particularly relative to how serious the people are who present it.
Oh, they're the richest people in the world.
Strength is a dynamic. Power is a dynamic. It does not exist in a vacuum. If you shrink government, you are ceding whatever power the corporations wanted to take from government. You're ceding it to the corporations.
Right.
Jeff Bezos came, Bill Gates came, Mark Zuckerberg came.
They all came. This is also a very old Republican adage, but it's made even more obviously insincere, or its insincerity is shown by the fact that the people that are making this case are literally billionaires who are ransacking the government for their own ends.
Not just billionaires. I mean, you can see it. I mean, we're going to play a clip from Ezra Klein.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day is almost the exact same dynamic. Like like as if people don't understand, like government is some entity that exists in a vacuum. And there's one person in there pressing a lever. Government is a process. And what the output of that process is a function of input and what's happening with that process. And that process at times can be one way and it can be another way. And those two, the difference between those two ways is less corporate influence, more corporate influence. There's always corporate influence. It's just a question of how intense it is. But we'll talk about that. I only raise that because RFK, his whole thing was like, there's a corporate capture.
Big pharma.
In these regulatory agencies. And the idea that you get rid of corporate capture by attacking what it's capturing is just absurd.
Or firing the inspectors general who would find the waste and fraud that they're saying is the result of this corporate capture. It's entirely unclear.
Those are two different sort of camps that both have their desire to basically allow for corporate power.
Right.
The way that you keep people from taking hostages is you kill all the hostages and just keep killing the hostages. We'll talk more about that in a moment. But speaking of kidnapping, more information. And of course, we're only going to get this in dribs and drabs, right? Because they sent 300 people to essentially a dungeon, a gulag in El Salvador. And there is no doubt in my mind, and ostensibly because they were all members of a gang, a criminal terrorist gang. We have no way of knowing if that's actually true because their only methodology seems to be tattoos.
One of our goons saw a tattoo on his arm.
We will only hear, and it will take a while, and we probably won't hear from all of them, from people who had full-on legal status. Because it's possible there were people on those planes who were not here, were here without documents. Maybe they overstayed their visa. Maybe they came into the country. Their parents took them. or maybe they came across the border without documents. We will not hear from them because their families or their friends who may also be undocumented they have no,
they're terrified.
They're not going to come forward.
They don't want to shine a spotlight on themselves.
100%.
We're seeing this when it is with healthcare, with hospitals. This is the way that the government makes a group of people go underground. And so when we hear stories of this, 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 stories of like this, you can be sure that there was a lot more people who weren't what they say. And that's the problem with the failure of due process. Here's Jesse Waters hand waving this away. The idea that we could actually, that we claim, and here's the thing, they've got to claim that these people are in a gang to sell it politically. So who they are is obviously important, but you cannot determine who they are unless there is some type of official process which determines that. And what we call the legal term is due process. Yeah.
It's not in the way that we use it in the vernacular.
You can't take away people's due process like that. And I don't trust the El Salvadorian government to be making sure that they're not torturing people, that they're vetting them properly. They need to be vetted on this side.
Democrats always
all right, pause it for 1 second. I just want to say something. We say as a shorthand, it's a person's due process. It is not a person's due process. It is a person's right to go through due process. That's a very subtle but important distinction because the due process is supposed to exist regardless of whether there's people to go through it or not.
Yeah.
The due process exists in the same way that our laws exist. They exist whether there's people breaking them or not. Due process exists. It is the way that we adjudicate things.
It's the bedrock of our judiciary, and it's constitutionally enshrined.
People, that they're vetting them properly. They need to be vetted on this side.
Democrats always say this could happen.
It did happen. It didn't could
They're
happen.
torturing
it did.
them?
Did you watch the video?
Torturing.
Yeah. Did you read the
shaving
Time
their
magazine?
heads.
Time magazine was there when the gay barber from Venezuela who had a crown tattoo that said "Mom" was being processed coming into the El Salvadorian. Oh, am I boring you again? I'm sorry.
No, but you've been talking about this gay barber from El Salvador with some stupid tattoo for weeks. Weeks, Jessica.
Come on.
It's just a gay barber.
He's not into you.
He's an innocent guy who got swept up in a deportation, and hopefully we get it figured out and straightened out. But a lot of people in this country, Jessica, get arrested for things that they didn't do, get falsely accused, falsely convicted.
I'm also against racial profiling.
That doesn't mean you just stop arresting people. That doesn't mean you stop arresting criminals because one guy was arrested who was innocent.
Okay, all right. We don't need to hear any more.
Wow.
The reason why he knows that innocent people get arrested all the time is because of due process. Because they get arrested, then they go through due process and we find out they're innocent. This guy has already received the punishment, and it might as well be capital punishment. To that end, The Atlantic reported yesterday, in the case of a father of a 5-year-old disabled child,
Abrego Garcia,
he is here legally.
Came to
this country.
A teenager.
Because he was fleeing in 2011 gang threats in El Salvador. He received in 2019 protected legal status from a U.S. immigration judge. In other words, he went through the process, who found he would likely be targeted by gangs if deported back. That's what asylum's for. He was scooped up by ICE because of a supposed clerical error. And of course, there is no due process. So there was no assessment of there was no way to catch that clerical error. On March 12th, Abrego Garcia picked up his son after work from the boy's grandmother's house when ICE officers stopped the car, saying his protected status had changed. Officers waited for Abrego's wife to come to the scene to take care of the boy and then drove him away in handcuffs. A couple of months later, he is sent to El Salvador. In Monday's court filing, attorneys for the government admitted that the Salvadoran man, this being Garcia, had been deported accidentally. And here's the kicker that speaks to what Waters is saying. Although ICE was aware of his protection from removal from El Salvador, Abrego Garcia was removed to El Salvador because of an administrative error, the government told the court. Trump lawyers said the court has no ability to bring Abrego Garcia back now that he's in Salvadoran custody.
They have no ability. They can stage a photo op in that El Salvador prison with the shaved heads of hundreds of men, which included innocent people that were rounded up without due process.
Who cares what those identity of those men are? Just put him in a cage.
They can do that.
They are now
but they
saying
can't bring him back to his family.
It's too late.
You know what would have prevented it from being too late? If he had his due process and this was able to be delineated. Do we have this J.D. Vance tweet about this? He really thought he owned the liberal media here, responding to John Favreau of Pod Save America, who said, any comment on this at Marco Rubio? How about you at J.D. Vance? You just admitted to accidentally sending an innocent father from Maryland to a torture. It's cut off here, but you get the gist. Vance responds, my comment is that according to the court document you apparently didn't read, he was a convicted MS-13 gang member with no legal right to be here. My further comment is that it's gross to get fired up about gang members getting deported when ignoring citizens they victimize. Next slide is the actual court filing, which completely contradicts what J.D. Vance was saying there.
Which says that he was accused at one point of being a member of MS-13, but because he got his due process back then, they found now. In fact, he was clear to that.
Right. An informant had essentially fingered him as somebody who could have been a gang member, and there were no charges filed.
And you can't necessarily take, I've just been on like one grand jury duty session. You can't necessarily take the word of informants as face value. Typically, they want other evidence than one guy that works on the payroll, the cop saying, yeah, him.
They're incentivized to give information. It's the same arguments that were used against the Bush administration's use of torture during the War on Terror. Information that's given under duress is not always reliable. And also the lack of reliability increases in many ways.
Did he just do this? Did he just edit?
No, this was yesterday. But this guy, Brian Metzger, who I think is with Business Insider, I'm not sure. Okay, yeah, Business Insider. So he tweeted that going after the reporter who had tweeted out the filing, and then immediately realized, FYI, I edited this post because I mistakenly believed the determination from the immigration judge had been made in 2021. Whoops, no, that wasn't correct. Edited the original post because 2019, when this determination was made, was during the Trump admin, not the Biden admin. None of this matters. He wasn't convicted of a crime like you initially said.
Oh, but he was implying that the reason why the guy got off from being MS-13 was because of Biden, and then had to remember that, oh wait, Trump was president.
Right. Oof. Yeah. This is also, I really want to note that gang databases and gang affiliations have been used to further mass incarceration in this country for quite a while. It's, in 2016, I think it was Oregon that did away with their gang database because despite having less than 8% of their population being black at the time, 64% of people in the database were black. And you see this across a variety of different states where it's used to elevate charges against poor people and marginalized communities by saying they have gang ties. And it's very difficult to determine how they get on one, how they get off of one. And throughout this tough on crime, broken windows policing period of our history, this was used over and over and over again. So you see how our policies at home are now, and honestly, the militarization of our police force that escalated a lot of this in the wake of 9/11, where they got all this excess military equipment and the surveillance state expanded. They're using these same tactics that they've used against many Americans and applying that to justify the disappearances of innocent people and bragging about it, where they say, there's nothing we can do. That's Stephen Miller. That's Stephen Miller basically going like,
here's the DOJ.
Suck on this.
In their filing, the DOJ says there is no jurisdiction in habeas. Plaintiffs admit, as they must, that the United States does not have custody over Abrego Garcia. They acknowledge that there may be difficult questions of redressability in this case, reflecting their recognition that defendants don't have the power to produce Garcia from CCOT in El Salvador. But even more, they concede that Garcia is not in defendant's custody. Essentially, they're saying, like, we dropped him off already. There's nothing we can do. The government, we can't be compelled to have this guy show up because we don't have him.
There was nothing they could do when the plane was already in the air and the judge ordered that the plane turn around. Hey, the plane's already in the air. Oh, now this guy's innocent? Well, there's nothing we can't do. Can't bring him back.
They all had a problem with the judge overruling the military plane.
Right.
These people are ghouls.
I mean, they're fascists, right? They are fascists. This is a fascist administration. And on this issue, there is no question. They are disappearing people at this moment.
We'll talk more about this later. We've got a couple of words from our sponsors. The show today is sponsored by Liquid IV. I barely have to do anything for this. Because all I have to do is take out this bottle of Liquid IV that I have here every day that I do the show. Sometimes, I think like 2 days ago, I forgot it was in the fridge.
Yeah, you had to run and go grab it.
I had to run and go get it.
You need it for the show.
I need it for the show. And I need it for I feel the difference at the end of the day, actually. I really do. And very little impacts me as a person, like physically. I just always have I'm like this. I'm flatlined. But I can feel it when I'm not drinking the Liquid IV. Doesn't matter what you do. You can get extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. It is powered by LIV Hydroscience. Liquid IV helps you break the mold. It's got flavors like hydration multiplier, sugar-free raspberry lemonade right here. It's it tastes like lemonade, but it's 0 sugar. Has notes of ripe, freshly picked raspberries and citrusy. People know what raspberry lemonade tastes like. It's delicious. True to fruit flavors that keep you hydrated. They have all sorts of hydration, multiple flavors on their website. Acai berry, lemon lime, pina colada. They got a raspberry melon. They got a couple. I got 4, I think. 4 sugar-free, and then a bunch of other ones. White peach is a sugar-free rainbow sherbet, sort of like a fruity punch type of thing. Break the mold and your own ritual, and own your ritual, I should say. Just 1 stick and 16 ounces of water hydrates better than water alone. Powered by LVI Hydroscience, it's an optimized ratio of electrolytes, essential vitamins, and clinically tested nutrients that turned ordinary water into extraordinary hydration. It's got 3 times the electrolytes of a leading sports drink, 8 essential vitamins and nutrients, always non-GMO, vegan, gluten-free, dairy-free, and soy-free. Come in really convenient packets, great for travel. I'm heading down to Florida on Thursday to do another one of those PBD things. And I'm going to take a couple of packets.
Good call.
Yep. Embrace your ritual with extraordinary hydration from Liquid IV. Get 20% off your first order of Liquid IV when you go to liquidiv.com. Use the code MajorityRep, not Majority Report. It's Majority Rep. We checked that, right, Russ? Oh, we got to introduce Russ today. Majority Rep at checkout. That's 20% off your first order when you shop Better Hydration today using promo code MajorityRep at liquidiv.com. We'll put a link in the YouTube and podcast description to that stuff. Also, every year you say you're going to learn a new language. Maybe based upon what I did yesterday, I should maybe learn a little French. but I'm focusing on Studio Espanol. But few of us actually commit to it. Babbel makes it easy for you to learn one in less time than you think. The thing that's easy about Babbel comes in very short, like 10-minute lessons, and I can knock off a couple of lessons when I'm walking to work, or I can just listen to one lesson, then I listen to music, or one lesson and an audiobook. It's great. Learning a new language is the pathway to discovering new cultures, so why not embark on learning something new? Great time to learn a new language, incidentally, with everything that's going on in this country. Babbel's, like I say, got quick 10-minute lessons. They're handcrafted over 200 language experts. Get you begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And my daughter at college has been using it to learn a new language. And I'm like, why am I even bothering sending you to college?
Right. This is cheaper.
And the thing is, conversing is really the key to understanding new languages. So Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. You can spend months with private teachers the old way of learning languages, and nothing screams tourist like holding a phone translation app to your face all day. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by the real life stuff that you actually need when you communicate. With a focus on conversation, you're going to be ready to talk wherever you go. Here's some proof. Studies from Yale, Michigan State, and other leading universities continue to prove that Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Significantly less expensive. They have over 16 million subscriptions sold. Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by a 20-day money-back guarantee. This year, get talking with Babbel. Let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is giving our listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/majority. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/majority, spelled B-A-B-B-E-L, BABBEL.com/majority, babbel.com/majority. Rules and restrictions may apply. We'll put the links in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Quick break. Rachel Cohen, formerly of Skadden Arps, big law in New York City and frankly around the country. She quit as a protest to their acquiescence to the Trump administration. We'll be right back. We are back. Sam Seder, Emma Vigeland on the Majority Report. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Rachel Cohen. She is a lawyer who technically is on the payroll for a couple more days, as my understanding, at Skadden Arps, which is one of the biggest law firms in the country. Just give it for folks who don't know that world. Tell us about that firm, how big it is, where it fits in sort of like the legal world.
Anyone who's not familiar with that world, I am a bit jealous and wish that we could all remain unfamiliar, but unfortunately no longer the case. Skadden is one of, like you said, the largest law firms actually in the world. So we have a presence there's offices in Asia, in Europe, and I believe our revenues were upwards of several $1 billion with a B last year. The partners have a profit per partner that is in the 7 figures, and there's a lot of kind of prestige chasing in the legal industry broadly. To the extent people care about for their employers, Skadden is very much on that list. There have been a couple of books that I've read actually where they were aimed at kind of legal audiences, and the way that they shorthand characterized a bit character as someone who was well connected, but also maybe a little bit of I don't know if I can say douchebag on your show because I haven't watched it that much. was that they would say that they worked at Skadden Arps. So I'll be toning for that for some time.
That's good context.
How many when we say the biggest law firm in the world, tell people how many lawyers work there, how many partners are there?
It's not necessarily one of the biggest law firms in the world, but it is one of the most profitable. I would say it has like some of the widest reach. And so I believe our partnership is only about 1,000 people. I can look it up right now. But it has much more to do with the level of profits that people have and the level of access that you have. There's a reason that our executive partner, Jeremy London, was speaking with Donald Trump directly about kind of the attack on law firms that has been launched by the Trump administration over the last several weeks. These law firms, Skadden, Paul Weiss, if people are familiar, are these firms that have made major deals with the Trump administration, including promising millions of dollars worth of pro bono work to the Trump administration.
I want to get to that because that to me is the one that really sort of resonates here. But so it starts with Paul Weiss, and ostensibly this is about Donald Trump taking vengeance against these firms that have had in the past a lot of Democratic clients. They're sort of like loosely associated with Democratic politics.
And I think Paul Weiss's partner was involved in the Stormy Daniels prosecution, the hush money case that had, was
and all these firms, there is somebody who either worked maybe in the context of the Mueller investigation or in other investigations against Donald Trump. So ostensibly it's about revenge. Give me your sense of, well, before we get to that, tell us what it is exactly. When they went to Paul Weiss, when they went to Skadden Arps, and we should say there are other firms that have done something very different, and we'll get to those in a moment. But what is it how does a federal government go and say, we're going to attack or punish you? What are they threatening them with?
The government is targeting a variety of corporate law firms, and there's firms that are fighting back. There's firms that aren't, as you mentioned, targeting a variety of corporate law firms by threatening to cancel government contracts or also use the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC's enforcement mechanisms to not only remove government contracts and security clearances from firms that they claim are engaging in quote unquote illegal DEI. My For 2 more days, boss used that term in an email sent firm-wide, which imagine being an attorney of color working 60, 70-hour weeks, constantly doing outstanding work and getting an email from your boss about how they wanted to listen to the Trump administration to stamp out the illegal DEI that is happening at Skadden Arps.
Imagine just being a lawyer and reading the words illegal DEI and saying, wait a second, a lawyer's writing this to me?
Jeremy, spell it out. It's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
And accessibility, actually, we should say, at least in the government context. But I mean, so what can they materially do? They can cancel government contracts that cost them money directly as a first order thing. They can also, I read, inhibit their ability to go into federal buildings, which I don't know how you can't obviously like go to federal court
yes, right.
and litigate in that instance.
And I do think even to your point of like what they can do, I think that that's still very much being figured out. And that's why people are challenging these, because there's a lot of people, he's using these EEOC enforcement mechanisms through a certain extent. And my firm actually hadn't even been targeted by an executive order. They just received an EEOC demand letter, which for the record, the deal they cut with Trump does not even include them dropping the EEOC demand letter or potential investigation. But they're using this kind of EEOC mechanism that a lot of former EEOC commissioners are saying is just patently illegal. They're using it wrong. And so even what they quote unquote can do, I think is up for debate. But what they are doing.
We're talking about what they're threatening with, because we really don't know what they can do yet until it's resolved in a court of law. And you can't know what they can do until you stand up to them. And your soon-to-be former firm refused to do that. So we should say that it also sounds like, because I'm reading this story about Coy, I guess it is. Is that the name of the
Coy?
Parkus Coy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell us their story, because this is sort of like the alternate universe. They decide, and frankly, the idea of a bunch of lawyers capitulating so quickly runs contrary to everything that I know of lawyers.
It's also a very bad deal. Even if you say these people aren't litigators, they're corporate, whatever, they went to the White House, didn't even have an executive order lodged against them, didn't get the EEOC demand letter, which requested personal information of my firm and also 19 other firms that was targeted at intimidating diverse employees, asking for name and email address and phone number and all of this stuff. They didn't even get that dropped. And they promised $100 million worth of pro bono hours to the Trump administration, which is more than twice Paul Weiss's $40 million that they promised that was a terrible deal anyway. But to jump back, and I have all of my little executive orders printed here because this is such an esoteric and inaccessible part of the legal industry, which is already inaccessible deliberately for many people. And so even leading with kind of the way that these firms are being targeted, the executive order that was lodged against Perkins Coie, before I came on, I heard y'all talking about these deportations and kind of the Stephen Miller of it all. And I think that it's important to name that the attacks on these corporate law firms, who are not very sympathetic victims, and I do not argue with anyone that they are, the attacks here are to intimidate corporate law firms out of providing certain forms of representation. Right. And they do a lot of asylum representation. They do a lot of kind of impact litigation because they're very well resourced. And so the Perkins Coie executive order was launched explicitly naming that it was meant to be retribution because Perkins Coie had an attorney that used to work there named Mark Elias, who has since left and started his own firm that Trump really, really hates. And so we have this. But my friends and I started organizing in that moment because we read it and it was clear in the executive order that the Trump administration was going to come after additional firms. And also in a public service loan forgiveness executive order, which came out the next day, he listed all of these different things that he didn't think should qualify for public service loan forgiveness anymore. And it includes things like aiding and abetting violations of federal immigration laws. And we know what that means in Trump speak. It includes things like supporting terrorism. We know what that means in Trump speak. Child abuse, including the chemical and surgical castration or mutilation of children, or the trafficking of children to so-called transgender sanctuary states. He's outlining what kind of work he does not want attorneys to be doing. And he followed it up, I believe, weekend before last, March 21st, it posted on the 22nd, with directions to the Attorney General to sanction attorneys that are engaged in this kind of representation.
And they can go back 8 years to assess whether these attorneys have been filing frivolous actions against the government simply based upon whether they lost. Yep. And so, of course.
And if Trump was to apply that standard to himself, I'm not necessarily sure he would be able to do so with the level of frivolity. I mean, but his frivolous lawsuits were getting rewarded with this anticipatory obedience by what? It was the other media organizations that gave in, but the law firms too.
Yeah, so, and it is anticipatory and it's also all projection, right? But I'm sorry, Sam, please.
Well, no. But I mean, I think the point you're making here is that this is all, any reason why they went after these firms was a pretense to basically say, you do not bring cases against us for immigration or any of our policy objectives that we want. And if you do, because Perkins Coie, they lost one or two clients. Apparently other clients were like, we appreciate what you're doing. But that's what this is about, right? I mean, it's about these law firms worrying that they're going to lose access, worrying that they're going to make targets out of their clients. Right. Like, I mean, if Skadden Arps is like representing, I don't know, pick a client, the federal government could be coming after these clients just because of their association with Skadden Arps. I mean, that is that's the fear here.
It is the fear, but it's also so ridiculous because it seems like all of these very smart people should understand. And I did work with them, and I do think that they're very smart, no matter how determined they are to prove me wrong over the last couple of days. But we have all of these very smart people, and surely you have to understand that you are not going to win by giving into a bully like the Trump administration. And I think it's this kind of like historical condescension where we're convinced that we can sit around and say, well, Neville Chamberlain, what a fool when he was just giving into the German demands. But do we think it was more obvious at that time? Or do we think that we just, for some reason, believe that we're smarter than all of these people that are not that much older than us, are still human beings that are smarter than us? It's not as clear as people think it is. And people are acting like it's still 2016. They're determined to prove that they're smarter than Donald Trump is. And whether that's true or not, right now, it doesn't appear to be, because you are getting outplayed.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right. I mean, I think it's very scary. I think, once they come for the lawyers, once they basically say to the lawyers, you can't represent a certain various groups in our society, and the lawyers say, okay, then it's just the floodgates are open. Because right now, as it stands, there's, I mentioned this yesterday on the program, there's about 2 or 3 things that are basically slowing the roll of the Trump administration. One is any type of political pressure, and we see that with the elections that are taking place today, because that undermines the confidence maybe of some lawmakers. But there's only so much that's going to do. And the other is organizing amongst people, broadly speaking, labor, whatnot. But at this very moment, the one thing that is slowing the roll is like the 80 some odd, maybe now 90 cases that have been brought against the Trump administration in various forms that are slowing their roll. Now, here's the other thing about you brought up the pro bono stuff. The Trump administration now, like I say, is dealing with all of these lawsuits, whether they're from the ACLU, whether they're from the Brennan Center, whether they're from Perkins Coie, all across the board. They don't have the resources to deal with all of these cases that are coming in. The DOJ, if anything, they have less resources than they had 6 months ago, because they're firing all these prosecutors. They're firing all these DOJ people. They're installing political appointees. Not always the brightest bulbs, frankly.
Not at all. And I don't think that you can be a good attorney and work for the Trump administration, because it requires you to kind of bend and disregard the law in so many different ways, and the system itself in so many different ways, that even if you are smart, you're probably not a very good attorney if you're working for that administration in this moment.
I think that's absolutely the case. We saw that just with the federal prosecutors in the Southern District who had to resign because they're just like, none of this makes sense.
Yep.
Where is that pro bono work going? That's what I want to know, because it seems to me that we could have, instead of, and this is aside from the fact that these are firms that were already doing pro bono work. They have a limited amount. I mean, I know this too. Like, they don't expand. This isn't an extra $100 million worth of pro bono work they're doing. They're going to be not doing other pro bono work to do this pro bono work. So there's an opportunity cost that's associated with it. But where are they deploying? Where are they deploying these resources? Because we could have a situation where Skadden Arps attorneys are fighting to deport people.
And it may just really quickly make sense to describe what pro bono work is more broadly for the audience, and these corporate law firms' relationship with it too, what it traditionally is and what the administration may be wanting.
Yeah, thank you so much, Emma, because I think that it's a super crucial piece of the puzzle here. So it's tough because you don't want to come on to any type of outward-facing media and act like corporate law firms that often charge upwards of $3,000 an hour for top partners, that they're on the front lines of justice work. We know that they are not. And we know the people that are doing that work are historically extremely underfunded because of the nature of American capitalism. And so we have these law firms that kind of say to people that are coming out of law school and really want the high paycheck that, okay, we know that a lot of our clients, a lot of the representations that you'll be doing are just very, very well resourced and maybe not exactly in the pursuit of justice, though they are in the pursuit of an adversarial legal system, which I think goes back to Sam's point around we need lawyers to bring cases because we don't have like a sua sponte legal system where stuff just goes to the courts when it's unconstitutional. You have to have lawyers to bring those cases. And that ties into the kind of pro bono work, because what law firms will do to kind of entice people to do some reputation management. And also, I really thought because they believed in it, though it's certainly not appearing that way, as those values are kind of put to the test against losing a modicum of profit, we have corporate law firms that will partner with a variety of the organizations that you just listed, ACLU, Brennan Center, et cetera, or even kind of more local organizations. And firms will allow their associates to do that pro bono work and count a certain number of hours or unlimited number of hours. Last year, I think I did over 350 hours of pro bono work towards my bonus requirement. They'll allow them to count it towards their bonus. And so you get people who kind of, it's viewed as mutually beneficial, it's you're training up, you get more responsibility, you also get to work on things that you care about. And so if we have large corporate law firms that are the best resourced and often ally with these organizations because they have just enormous amounts of staffing, though I did overstate and looked it up, and I think we only have like 350 partners at Skadden, which is crazy because, like I said, the revenue per year is in the billions with a B. But we have these people who are very well resourced who can kind of throw their weight and training behind these causes because otherwise they just don't have enough attorneys. And that's not because, like, thank God for big law. That's just the reality of the system in which we live and where resources have been allocated. And so I'm not arguing that that's normatively good, but it is really necessary within the legal system as currently existing. And so you have people that are being intimidated out of doing certain kinds of pro bono work. And you have all of these firm leaders saying, no, we're still committed to pro bono. But 2 weeks ago, they were saying the exact same thing about DEI. They won't put any of it in writing. And you have the government taking these firms, asking them to do millions of dollars worth of work for them, while also issuing the kinds of executive orders and guidance and fact sheets, quote unquote fact sheets. We're using that as in the way that the administration uses it. We have them putting out these things directing public interest attorneys to be punished, being stripped of their public student or their public service loan forgiveness if they work at certain organizations. So it's a multi-tiered attack. He's also attacking judges, but I think it's actually quite smart that he went to these large corporate law firms first, because it was a huge gamble. If they'd all united and stood up to him, it would have really undercut this all-out assault on the legal system. But the first time I read one of the executive orders, I said to myself, he has somebody inside doing this work who has worked at one of these places before, because he is betting on their kind of capitalistic cowardice to keep them from standing up for what's right. And I think that people's heads are so in the sand. They're so convinced that it's 2016 all over again, even though in 2016 they actually did stand up to the Trump administration. But they've been laying the groundwork for this for a very long time. The right is good at that. I have a case here that was, the opinion came out on March 14th, 2025. It's called RNC v. Justin Wetzel. It was a voting rights case. There's this judge on the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Texas named James Ho. You may be familiar. And
we should just remind people the Fifth Circuit is, there's essentially really a couple of judges down there that the right will venue shop. They will go down to the Fifth Circuit. They know there's a couple of venues within the Fifth Circuit, which is down in Texas, one of the states, where when they basically go into the lottery for judges, there's only like 2 judges there, and they know who they're getting. And there was an attempt by the Federal Judicial, essentially, Association to change that mechanism they had been using to venue shop, and they got so much pushback that they basically walked away from it. And so we're left with this. But that's why every time we hear one of these rulings, they'll come out of the Fifth Circuit.
Very much so. And so James Ho files the concurrence. He agrees in the judgment, no need to write an opinion. And he writes a concurrence that's 2 pages about how pro bono at corporate law firms has been biased for so long. There's another explanation. The pro bono activity in this case may just reflect the institutional bias at many of the nation's largest law firms. And then he cites some articles that are published in journals that are extremely right-leaning. We have the Federalist Society, which is a right-leaning organization on law school campuses that was founded decades ago, that put out their own journals so that people can write extremely biased things and then cite to it. It's kind of the legal journal of Fox News, and cites to things about pro bono institutional bias as if the reason that pro bono tilts towards people who do not have resources is because those firms are biased and not because that's who needs free legal work. And so this is a really just across the board, intentional, well planned out. It's brilliant, even though I think that it is normatively evil plan to undercut all of these things. And then you have big law attorneys who are convinced that they're smarter than the Trump administration and they can outmaneuver him.
Do you think that they're convinced that they're smarter than him and they're outmaneuvering him and they're going to be sly about this? Or do you think it's like, at the end of the day, they're just like, well, let's make this less friction. Let's just make this more frictionless and it doesn't matter to us.
I wish that it was the latter because I would understand that more. But I worked with these people for years. I worked with them for years. They genuinely just think that they are smarter than he is. And it's extremely troubling. And listen, I grew up in Ohio. I went to Ohio State and then I went to Harvard Law School. And it's something that I've seen play out over and over again. I hate to invoke the coastal elitism of it all because I think that veers into anti-intellectualism sometimes. And that's not it. We want people to read, to understand, to engage with the world. And it's not bad to do those things. But to assume that your educational credentials mean that you are smarter than someone who is a Republican because they grew up in, a different place than you are, and that's what we see a lot of the time. There's this belief in many of these white shoe corporate law firms and in many of these liberal spaces broadly with people with strong educational credentials that the reason that these decisions are being made is just because the people making them are stupid. And that is so fundamentally incorrect. They are outplaying us. And there are people that need to be educated and engaged with 100%, but they are not Stephen Miller. They are not sitting in the White House making these decisions right now. And that's the way that law firm leaders are treating it. My understanding is that the line on the ground at Skadden right now to associates is that Skadden got a great deal because they didn't really promise him anything at all. They just promised $100 million in pro bono work, and they get to decide what the pro bono work is. And the second anyone pushes on it, the partners that are saying it don't have answers for them, but have drunk the Kool-Aid of their own intellectual superiority so deeply that it's going to be too late before they figure out that they don't
understand that. I mean, frankly, Donald Trump, at the end of the day, if he doesn't get that $100 million worth of pro bono work, he still got what he wanted, which was to show that he could intimidate a firm like this. So if you're a smaller firm or you're an immigration attorney, you got your own, you're doing it on your own, and you're going against the government in an immigration proceedings. You're terrified right now. You're terrified.
And that's the thing that I'm so glad that you brought that back up, because it's so important that we bring back around. It's not about kind of the comeuppance of the corporate law firms. It is about the people legally in this country who are getting deported or indefinitely detained over free speech rights, or who are just due process rights violated right and left. And that is the ultimate end game here. It's not about the law firms. And that's why I quit, right? Like, it's not about, oh no, my firm might get embarrassed. It's people are going to die, and they probably already have.
And in terms of it rings very true to me what you're saying. Just the idea that they think they're smarter than, they think this is Sidney Powell or something like this all over again, as opposed to a very well coordinated, pre-planned lawfare legal assault, essentially, from the attorney general who's going to do whatever Trump wants. It's frankly the problem with the Democratic Party, where they think their views should be self-evident, as opposed to being, and the virtue of their views being smarter is self-evident, as opposed to making their case to the public. But that's a bit of an aside. Do you have a sense of what they want the pro bono work to be reoriented towards? Like, is this about cracking down on anti-Semitism, aka kids on college campus exercising their free speech rights? Because that's what it smells like to me, at the very least.
I am quite confident that that's one of the directions that it will be going in. And I think there's so much rhetoric that the Democratic Party and maybe those that criticize the critics is the word I was looking for. I also am not really my own intellect in this moment. Critics are leaning into is rhetoric that's really harmful here, right? Like focusing on the fact that some of the people that are being deported had no criminal history. That we care about everyone's due process rights. Like, we don't want to lean into some of this is okay. It's okay for some people to not have due process rights and not others. The notion of Pam Bondi is like, Barbie, Bondi, this playing into her as a moron when there's this clearly targeted attack. And then very much what you said, the branding around this task force to combat anti-Semitism is incredibly deliberate. My name is Rachel Cohen. I don't practice, but I've had an internet presence for some period of time. And I'm well aware that anti-Semitism exists. And so to position, though, the notion that the biggest threat to any minority in this country is an op-ed written against dropping bombs on children and not an authoritarian government that is picking and choosing due process and free speech rights. If they win that kind of marketing battle, and they're very close to it, we are in far deeper trouble than anyone has identified outside of a few spaces like this one.
Tell me just like your perspective on, I mean, you've worked with the folks at that firm, you went through law school, you probably have a sense of what the people at Paul Weiss are like, you may know some. Are you surprised that you're the only attorney to quit?
I'm not the only attorney. Two other people at Skadden have already quit since they announced their deal.
Is that right?
Publicly.
Okay.
Several others I know have quit who were not willing to kind of, I don't think that they will do media in the same way. Some of them might, but I think that people at Skadden are organizing around refusing to recruit. They are holding, my understanding is that someone quit yesterday at the end of a town hall meeting, and the rest of the group stood up and applauded him as he walked out. So I will say this, I don't know where the Paul Weiss people are because I'm not familiar of any of them quitting, but I will say none of this is to apologize for the big law industry. None of it is to say that the Skadden reputation and characterization isn't a little bit warranted, but I stayed at that firm for as long as I did because the people that I worked alongside believed in pro bono the same way that I did, believed in the justice system the same way that I did, even if we recognized that we were in this kind of very, very profit-centric space. And I think that we will probably see other people quit, but even if we don't, I think that you're going to see really powerful organizing. It's just a risk-averse industry, and a lot of people, it's been an incredible opportunity to get to do this kind of media. It's also unbelievably overwhelming, and I do not fault anyone who doesn't want to do it.
And can you, when you, we appreciate you coming on, your thought there sparked a question for me. Is there a really noticeable split between the associates, you're a third-year associate, and the partners at the firm? And if you could explain how the partners have this a much more direct financial stake in, the clients and how they're more likely to, obviously cave on this front.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much for opening, because I think that's important to understand as well. So Skadden is an equity partnership only structure. Most of these law firms have an equity partner and then like a junior or income partner tier. And if you're equity partner only, all of the profits that go in, and you might get a little bit of additional profits if you're the person that brought the client in, for example, but ultimately you're profit splitting with the rest of the partnership. And so I've gotten the question a lot if this is a generational divide. I don't think that it is. And I think that played, and that's not what you asked, to be fair. I'm voicing that because I'm sure there's people that are watching that are wondering the same thing.
But it overlaps. It overlaps.
Yeah. It does. And you're a little older if you're a partner, obviously. And I think that the way this all kind of ties into the kind of anti-intellectual, like the notion that young generations just get it and older generations just don't, I think is one that's really harmful. And there's so many lovingly referred to as old heads, right, that we can learn so much from. They just don't stay in the industry long enough to make partner, even if they go into big law for a couple of years, as I did, to build up some financial stability, get trained up, I really wanted to understand the private sector. I understand that came with a lot of financial benefit to me and working for clients that I didn't always agree with. And so I make no apologies for that because there are no apologies to be made. I also did learn a lot. And so people stay and they make partner. And if they've self-selected, they probably are a little bit more of a believer in institutions than I would personally identify. But I think that many of them understand just how out of left field this is. I think many of them understand that Donald Trump has authoritarian tendencies. And what I find fascinating is that they seem to think that someone else will fix it. And that's one of the things that made me, I experienced it at Harvard all the time, is you'd go in and people would say, can't believe no one's doing anything about this. And I'd be like, your dad's a senator. What are you talking about? Like, and so one of the reasons that I've decided to be so public on this, and something that I think is so important for people to remember, I have an unbelievable amount of privilege. I am also just one person backed by a lot of other people. And I hope that it is encouraging to see what can happen when you are organized with people that you really believe in and one person is willing to speak about something that is happening. Because whether we win or not, I know that if no one had spoken on this, the story would have died quite quickly. Because you have to have someone that's able to go and explain it and talk about it and all of these things. And it's such an important story, and it's such a difficult one to understand if you're not in the industry. It's so possible for a couple of us to do the right thing and have it mean something. And so if you're questioning and you're feeling so overwhelmed, this wasn't just me standing alone, right? This is friends whose values, it was a big values test to be in this industry following October 7th. And to be in kind of a high profile client facing industry as conversations were ongoing about not just US military policy, but also the rising transphobia of the Democratic Party and the willingness to sell people out. Those things are pressure tests. And once you know that you can trust people and organize with them, you've got your group. Like it, I hate to say it because I also, just like those partners, keep waiting for someone else to do this stuff. But at a certain point, if no one's doing it, you have to do it. You have to. Someone has to.
Yeah.
Rachel Cohen, thank you so much for your time today. Very much looking forward to what you do next. Keep us in the loop. Really appreciate both your coming on and telling us about it and every step you're taking, and all those folks who have left that firm in solidarity, and those who are staying and trying to figure out a way of, I don't know, undermining some of this stuff from within. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks so much for having me. I
Thanks,
really
Rachel.
appreciate the opportunity to explain.
Thank you.
All right, folks. We are going to head into the, I guess, the fun half now. We had some other stories to do, but that was just a lot more impressive and important than I think I had anticipated. Really inspiring.
The Paul Weiss,
amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And luckily, it seems like some firms are beginning to stand up. The Paul Weiss thing was just like a complete capitulation. I feel like that was the first domino to fall, especially given the firm's history. But maybe there's more. Like I'm not necessarily like Wilmer Hale might be. I think standing up. That's full disclosure. That was my dad's firm. My sister works there now. But they had Robert Mueller as a part of their firm as well. But I think they're maybe holding the line, at least for right now.
And we should say, like, this spirit of dissent and of fighting and of not capitulating, you can do this in just about whatever. You can do this in organizations that you're in. You can do this in professions and neighborhood associations. It's super important that we elevate institutions, entities, people who speak out, because it provides courage to other people. This is we're entering a very intimidating and scary era in our country, and there's really basically three options: fight, flight, and acquiescence. And really, at the end of the day, only fighting is going to keep this role. I will say this again. It was not clear to people that Nazis were Nazis in the way that we understand Nazis today in 1925 or 1927 or in 1935 maybe even.
We had rallies in this country in support of the Nazi cause, one that was seemingly deliberately invoked by the Trump campaign just recently in Madison Square Garden.
We had the Klan. Like, we don't need to reference Europe. We had the Klan here, Jim Crow South. That was, Robert Paxson, who's wrote The Anatomy of Fascism, talks about that as a proto-fascism. This is homegrown. It's secessionist. The way that
there's also a good argument, frankly, that the Nazis got the ideas for a lot of the eugenics in the from over here.
They got a decent amount of the
But within the context of a successful takeover and launching of authoritarian government, we just don't know. No one has experienced, well, maybe not no one, but the vast majority of us have not experienced it. And there is no doubt, there's no way to predict where we will be in, frankly, 6 months or 18 months or 12 months or 24 months. But I can tell you that if there is such a thing as losing a democracy, as sort of shabby as ours was, we are in the process of losing it.
It would look a lot like what we're experieing in this moment.
Would look identical.
Right.
Like, this is we have television commentators poo-pooing due process. We have the most successful and profitable law firms in the world basically saying, we're not going to go to court. Okay,
universities.
Think about the cowardice associated in a law firm. That judge that they would go to, they've got to probably, for the most part, the vast majority of these judges believe in the law. Not all, but certainly the ones in this district, are going to be are going to see the law as somewhat sacrosanct.
They're going to ban a Paul Weiss partner from a federal building. Call their bluff on that. Are you joking? If they're representing a certain client in federal court, what is the threats, as she was saying, as Rachel was saying, are so, I feel like, easily stood up against if these major firms with billions of dollars in profit and billing stood alongside one another.
It's very disturbing, and that's where we're at. And tomorrow we're going to be talking to some folks from a public interest law firm about cases that they're bringing, and we're also going to be talking about the assault on our payment system. Because this is a multifaceted sort of assault on our government. We'll go into the fun half. It probably won't be so much fun. We're going to be talking about the HHS firings, talk a little bit about the tariffs and how people should understand these tariffs. And I'll just say this briefly because we're on the free half, and I want people to understand this. They're claiming that it's going to raise $600 billion a year. Let's just take it at face value. Let's assume these tariffs do. Understand that that's $600 billion a year. They're projecting it out 10 years, which of course is absurd because it may be a different president. There may be a Congress that actually is willing to sort of say, no, you can't have these tariffs. But let's just take these assumptions for granted. Understand when they say this, there's two things that are happening. Assuming these tariffs stay in effect, they're going to use the supposed revenue over the next 10 years, $6 trillion, as a way of computing their budget plans, which will include trillions of dollars of tax cuts. So on one hand, you're taking revenue from the U.S. government in tax cuts. On the other hand, in their mind, you're adding revenue in the form of tariffs, which are also basically taxes.
Regressive taxes.
But the difference is, The tax cuts are going to the wealthiest, and the tariffs are regressive. The cost of that car going up 25%, or your avocados going up 25%, or it doesn't matter. We'll feel it across the board. Impacts somebody making $40,000 a year. Impacts somebody making $70,000 a year. Impacts somebody making $100,000 a year. Much more than someone who makes $700,000 a year. $2 million a year. $5 million, $1 billion, whatever. Understand, these tariffs are a redistribution of money from people with less money to people with more money.
Yep.
That's it.
Right.
Government always redistributes money. Always. Every action it takes, you can see as a redistribution. The only question is, which direction is it going in?
And Trump doesn't have to worry about going through Congress to raise taxes on the poorest and the middle class because,
through those tariffs.
Because he can just do it through the tariff as a compounding.
But why? Because Chuck Schumer
right.
allowed that Republican budget, dirty budget, to include a provision where Congress no longer has the authority to roll back those tariffs.
Yep. Made it unilateral for Donald Trump.
We won't rest.
It's insane.
We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest. We won't rest.
You can only say it 4 times.
Yeah. Time for a nap.
There'll be a little disturbance, but we're okay with that. It won't be much.
Folks, it's your support that makes the show possible. You can become a member, jointhemajority.report.com. When you do, you not only get the free show free of commercials, but you also get the fun half. Also, justcoffee.coop. Fair trade coffee. That's why they call it Just Coffee. They also have hot chocolate. They used to have more stuff, but it's Just Coffee because they're just. Get the coupon code majority, get 10% off. Matt.
Tonight, Left Reckoning, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Same sort of topics we're talking about today. I have Chip Gibbons of Defending Rights and Dissent, which is one of my favorite sort of rights defense organizations, talking about the Gaza protests. Also, we'll talk about the war crimes related to Signalgate and that sort of stuff. So check that out. Patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get the postgame.
Pete Scott's breath. I just wanted to tell you that whatever that link was that you sent us, it broke our system. Do not send us big, long links.
You ruined the IM.
You have
we
literally
can't read any of this crap.
Broke the IM. Do not send us extended links. They make sure they're tiny links, not ones that are literally.
Oh my goodness.
Now we gotta.
Can't read any of this.
I know it.
Probably shouldn't be telling people how to
sorry.
break our chat, but anyway.
Well, there you go. We got to get that fixed. See you in the fun half.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt. What is up, everyone? Nomi Key.
You did it.
Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon. Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry.
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.